Richemont just sold Baume and Mercier. Baume apparently had been underperforming and possibly even losing money for at least a decade. They also didn't fit into Richemont's strategy of going up market. There's also a rumor going around that Zenith was up for sale. Analysts believe that Swatch Group should offload some of their brands. Fossil Group is under debt restructuring, and for the last 3 years, sales revenues for the industry as a whole have declined. All of this seems to indicate that there are some structural challenges in the industry. To understand what's going on, we need to talk about conglomerates and the 3 problems I call the crowd, the name, and the shadow. Let's dive in. For context, it's important to state some key facts. Since 2000, the Swiss industry has transitioned from a low-cost volume industry to a much more premium, high-price, low-volume industry. Overall, since the year 2000, the industry has grown and transitioned massively, and on a whole, it's a successful industry. The last 3 years' decline are also mainly down to external factors: China, inflation, and a couple of other things. Right now, though, luxury, not just watches, across the board is down. People are shying away from anything luxury right now. So why are Baume and Mercier being sold? To answer that question, you have to ask, why do conglomerates like LVMH, Richemont, and Swatch succeed? In the simplest form, you as a conglomerate look at tied companies. You try to figure out what their potential is in terms of costs you can save and revenue you can generate versus the price you pay for acquiring the asset. Basically, it's just like private equity. You buy cheap, you cut costs, and then you try to grow revenue to recoup the acquisition cost. The question you, of course, might be asking is how, if a company that on its own is struggling, does a conglomerate think it can turn it into a profitable company? Well, basically, they have 2 levers. First, it's shared costs. If you have 5 independent brands with 5 HR functions, 5 R&D functions, and 5 bracelet manufacturing facilities, you at least consider if some of those functions can be consolidated and shared across the 5 brands. One big bracelet manufacturing facility to supply all 5 brands instead of 5 facilities for each individual one, well, that's part 1 of the equation. The second part, you simply assume that you can run these businesses better than the people that are currently running them, and that this will lead to revenue growth and market acquisition. But there's a problem, because only one of those levers is actually viable in the long term. The cost side is always short term. Always. You might get a more efficient company and your costs may go down as a group, but nothing happening on this side of the equation directly affects growth. Before, you had an independent company that was struggling and expensive to run. Once you've cut costs, you've still got a company that's struggling. They've just got slightly lower costs, and those costs are going to go up eventually because, inflation. Everything hinges on your ability to be good at growing the business and making the company commercially viable. And it's in this light you have to look at the Baume and Mercier sale. For whatever reason, skill, focus, patience, Richemont failed at the growth lever. Their argument is, on the surface, it's not a strategic fit, which is shorthand for, we couldn't get the brand to perform the way we wanted it to. Zenith, same story. The calls from investors to offload some of Swatch Group's, same story. From there, a business gets put up for sale. Either an independent investor takes over the brand or another conglomerate steps in and the cycle repeats. You figure out a way to cut costs and you figure out a way to make the brand commercially viable. But this is going to be exceptionally hard because of the crowd, the name, and the shadow problems. This is where we get to the point where I state that part of the problem is that there are far too many watch brands because of those 3 problems. And we'll start with the crowd. Usually, when you're looking at any market, you're thinking about your target addressable market. How many people do you think are interested in the kind of products that you are selling? And is this market growing or shrinking? On a whole, globally, the world's population is growing. That means more customers. On a whole, people in general are getting richer. So there are more people that can afford pointless wrist jewelry. And on a whole, it looks like smartwatches are a supplement to real watches and not in all cases a direct competitor. Also, on a whole, it does though look like that people are wearing watches a little bit less in the younger generations. The question then is, how do you convince these customers to buy your product? You throw money at them in the form of advertising. You need to tell people that you exist. And the problem is, there are literally hundreds of other brands doing the exact same thing. You are shouting for attention in a crowd of other brands shouting for their attention as well. On top of that, a lot of brands have been moving upmarket because rich people have more money. And that's true. But what's the problem? And I know you know what it is. Just say it with me. The higher up you go, the fewer rich people there are. So this is your baseline. A generally incredibly crowded market and a push to a crowd out of a much smaller, but in theory, much more profitable segment of the market. The rich people are literally at the pointy end of the pyramid. There's just less people there. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. If you are one of those 50% of the people watching this video that have not subscribed yet, please do so. It's a huge support for the channel. It means a ton, and I would really, really like to hit 200,000. Thanks a ton. But a crowded market isn't a problem if you've got the best product. And that's where you hit the name problem, because having the best product in watches doesn't matter enough. Because why do you buy something? You buy it because it's the best. So some version of quality or aesthetics or whatever you want to call it. You buy something because it's great value. That's price. Or you buy it because you like the company that sells it. Brand value. Those are the three things. Quality, price, brand. Milk has absolutely no brand value. So it's mainly a price game. Unless, of course, you can convince somebody that your organic, free-range, hand-milked milk is just better for your digestive system than that, terrible factory milk. A car is a mix. People do have some tribalism towards Mercedes or BMW or Audi, but quality, product features, mileage, those kind of things still matter a lot. If Mercedes slack on the quality, not all people are going to blindly stick with Mercedes. But luxury watches, what's going to make you switch from the Rolex brand logo if it's the only one you've ever heard of? You've already made up your mind that $10,000 for a Submariner is perfectly reasonable. A $9,400 Planet Ocean is not going to be compelling. Neither is a $7,000 Seamaster 300M. Omega can't peel any potential Rolex buyers off because of price. And quality? Who the hell can tell if the Rolex is good or bad? For regular customers, they've got no reliable way of knowing. So I'd argue that for luxury watches, you're basically in the name fight. Omega could make the best spec'd, best machined, nicest ceramic diver ever, and they'd still be met with a majority of customers saying, it's nice, but I want the Rolex. The name is so powerful, and what selling point you have on quality or price often can't outvoice the power of those powerful names. Finally, there's the shadow problem. At most luxury price points, there are a couple of brands that are these big trees that cast a huge shadow over all other brands. It's brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, Lange & Söhne, maybe Cartier for women's watches. When Jaeger-LeCoultre raised their prices, they essentially just moving further into the shadow of Patek Philippe. They are literally making it harder for themselves. This also applies to the product. And we're going to use another Rolex example. It's not just Rolex that is the shadow. There are others, but they're just brilliant examples. So if I ask 1,000 people to name a luxury dive watch, which one is going to get the most mentions? My guess is the Submariner. And I've said this a million times. The Submariner is at its core designed to be broadly appealing. It's boring by design because boring means a lot of people are going to like it. It's got zero quirks. It's got zero foibles. They don't mess around with weird case shapes, helium escape valves, and in steel, there are literally only two colors. This is the most average luxury diver in the world. And this is what most people want. Not just a Rolex, but an easy wearing luxury diver. As any other brand, here's your rock and a hard place decision. If you want your watch to be really interesting for a lot of people, you need to make it boring. But the more boring you make it, the more you invite comparison with the big daddy like the Submariner. It's the same thing that applies to integrated bracelets. Somebody comes out with an integrated bracelet, it does well. The next company comes out with theirs, and the next, and the next, and the next. And at some point, there are just so many options that, how much value are you adding by adding a 55th version of some integrated bracelet watch to the mix? They are just these 3 or 4 or 5 big, shadowy integrated bracelets, and those are the ones that people are going to gravitate to. Your option then is to step out of the shadow. So I need to be different to stand out from the Submariner or the Nautilus or the Speedmaster, and that's how you get out of the shade, right? But the problem is you sacrifice the size of the audience. So you pick your poison. Do you want a big audience with a big shade, or do you want no shade, but also a very small audience? If your product isn't absolutely awesome, you are screwed. And this is why I'm convinced that for brands that start above $5,000, there are way too many options. It doesn't surprise me at all that Zenith are being discussed as being for sale. I really like a lot of their watches, but in their mainstream offerings like the Chronomaster Sport, I don't think their brand can peel off enough Submariner or Speedmaster customers. And in their Hublot-like offerings, I think Hublot also casts too much of a shadow. JLC, Nico Leonard actually said it quite clearly in a video the other day. Nobody buys a Reverso as their first watch. They've already got a Patek or a Vacheron lying around. And why? If I'm looking to choose between a Vacheron 56 or a Lange Saxonia or a Master Control in gold, would I ever choose the JLC as my first option? Most people wouldn't. I'm convinced it's brands like these that are struggling, and it's only getting harder. It's not that it's impossible. Maybe a brand like Moza or Ulysse Nardin have found a voice that resonates in the shouting match. But I think those kinds of brands are the exception, not the rule. If you're not that big shade-throwing tree, you're likely struggling. And as long as it's basically a shouting match about who has the most recognizable name, more brands are going to lose than win. There is an upside though. And I said earlier, you can compete on quality, value, and brand. Where are the biggest success stories in the market right now? They are in the value space. Christopher Ward, Asian factory brands. Weirdly, I do consider Ming kind of a value brand. I know their prices go wild, but for what you get, they are a value brand. And the growth is because of the fact that all of those other brands have moved up and out of this space, leaving space for others, lowering the number of people in the shouting match. And they're not just using brand as the selling point. They are using value and quality and variety. Creativity is what's driving people to these watches. Christopher Ward have in their Trident Divers a completely forgettable, uninteresting, middle-of-the-road product. And it's fantastic, just like a Submariner, because it's perceived as great value and great quality. People will bitch a little bit about their logo, but they're going to buy it anyway. And because it's not a brand game, coming up with something good in terms of design quality, product quality at a relatively speaking fair price is going to work if you do that well as a company. And there just aren't that many big shady trees in that space either below $4,000. So there's still room to grow. I would even go so far as to say that you could have made an argument that more brands should have been killed off after the quartz crisis. Conglomerates and private investors potentially threw too much money at brands thinking they could turn them around. Their money just in essence being a sort of artificial life support for up to 40 years. I sometimes get the feeling with watch brands that it's a little bit like something Anthony Bourdain talked about in his book Kitchen Confidential about the restaurant scene in New York. He basically said there was always some rich guy that had this dream of opening a restaurant, and they inevitably all went under, but the totality of so many people having so much money to open a restaurant meant you kept having these new restaurants coming out and people throwing in money and keeping sort of restaurants alive that should never really have existed. And I do see sometimes the same kind of tendency in watches. Somebody acquires an old brand, an old label, they try to revitalize it. Some of them survive and others just kind of go through this cycle of decline. And then someone, buys them and they try again, and someone buys them and they try again. And I just don't think it's healthy keeping all of these brands alive necessarily. But we're here now, and in a time where people are moving back to reusable diapers and thrift shop clothing, if you don't already have thick roots and cast a very big shadow, you're in for some very rough years. Some trees, I honestly do believe, need to be cut down for the forest as a whole to thrive. Those were my thoughts. Share yours in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.